So remember how Sun wanted to make a music circle? Let me clear something up. Around 2001, Sun applied to Comiket as a dojin music circle called Shanghai Arisu Gengakudan, which literally translates to Shanghai Alice Fantasy Ensemble. He got rejected though, and so he went back into game development, and that's how we got Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. However, he did stick with the same name for the circle. The subtitle, Team Shanghai Alice, was actually added after OST's release, and it's the name we use because honestly, it rolls off much better in English. Alright, okay, so the man really wanted to make concept albums but ended up making video games instead. Well, that's not to say he completely abandoned the idea. I briefly mentioned Sun's music series in other videos, officially known as Sun's Music Collection, and how they have some ties to the world of Touhou, featuring stories that follow the characters of Maribel Harn and Renko Usami. It's basically a side project that's tied to his main one, which is a smart way of handling things, I guess. However, one among them stands out in particular, and it happens to be the very first of the albums released by Sun, Horai Ningyo Dolls in Pseudo Paradise. In my Windows Trilogy video, I quickly mentioned that it was released at the end of 2002 in Comiket 63, but it was actually originally released alongside the OST in Comiket 62. Both of them contain the exact same songs, of which only 3 of them are actually original compositions. The rest are arrangements of both music from Touhou games and of music that Sun provided for other games made by the amusement makers group he was part of in college, most notably Seiho Project, which might actually be a topic for another video. However, I'm not really here to talk about the music, which sounds really weird considering this is a music CD, but the point is this album also comes with a short story that is completely different depending on the version you're looking at, and that's the main topic of discussion here. Let's get the Comiket 63 release out of the way first since it's a bit more straightforward. Rather than a story, this one has more like little snippets that accompany every song, some of which have ties to Touhou of course. Curiously enough, the first one for Legend of Horai makes mention of Princess Kaguya, which is first and foremost talking about the tale of the bamboo cutter, but a character directly based on said Kaguya would eventually be introduced in Imperishable Night, which might support the idea that Sun had at least some planning for these games, but it could also just be coincidence. This next one doesn't seem like coincidence though. Alongside this album released the first trial version of Perfect Cherry Blossom, and so Lovely Man of Cherry Blossom's Japanese flower reads, I wonder if it's still sleeping under that cherry tree. The flower petals were once so crimson, but they get paler year by year. There may no longer be anything remaining beneath the soil. The cherry tree almost certainly refers to the Saigyo Ayakashi, and the person sleeping under it is either the poet mentioned in Yuyuko's character profile, or it could also be Yuyuko herself. Both of the songs that mention dolls could refer to Alice, though I feel that's a bit too easy. Reincarnation speaks of a Western-style mansion. The Scarlet Devil mansion is obviously the first one that comes to mind, but the rest of the text doesn't really align with that assumption, mentioning a girl and her daughter. A similar building is described in the other version of the story, so maybe it's referencing that? The other candidate would be the Prince Rivers mansion, and considering the entire family used to live there according to the sisters' profiles, it seems more fitting, but that's still a very long shot. There is also that theory that it's talking about Mima, reincarnation is one of her themes after all, with her daughter being Marisa. That's just a very popular fandom thing in general, but I don't really see it here to be honest. Then of course Eternal Shrine Maiden obviously refers to Reimu and how the Hakone Shrine is only ever visited by yokai, but alright, enough trivia. The Comiket 63 version has some neat stuff in it, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about in this video. When people bring up Dolls in Pseudo Paradise, they're usually referring to the original version from Comiket 62, and its story that remains shrouded in mystery to this day. So the original version of Dolls in Pseudo Paradise contains a short horror murder mystery story that's inspired by the novel And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which itself is inspired by an old rhyme that I won't name. This is not the only time Sun's referenced this book though. We have Flandre's Spellcard And Then Will There Be None, obviously parodying the title, and her theme You and Owen Was Her makes reference to the names of the people who are assumed to be the murderers, with You and Owen being a play on unknown. But anyways, in the book, 8 people are invited to an island where they are systematically killed in ways that mirror each line of the original rhyme. Meanwhile, Sun's story talks about 8 honest men who drift away into a paradise, later revealed to be Gensokyo, as they get picked off one by a mysterious killer, though it mostly forgoes referencing the original rhyme with the methods. Each segment of the story accompanies a particular song, and each of them except for the last one seem to be told from the perspective of one of the 8 honest men, who are all differentiated by their most prevalent aspect. A bunch of them get killed by something or someone just referred to as a clown, while for others it's not really specified. I'm gonna quickly recap what happens to each of them here, but if you want a good refresher or simply haven't read the story, there are links in the description to the translation from the Touhou wiki and another one done by Kafka Fuda. Either of them works really. 8 honest men get spirited away to a so-called paradise, after one of them finds a hole in a peach tree. The most curious one runs into the forest, gets tricked by a clown and then beheaded. The most beautiful one gets captured by the clown in the middle of a storm and is taken away. The youngest ones snuck away from a party, and in the darkness they were beheaded by the clown. The most cowardly one tried to hang themselves, but survived the attempt, and is now the one who has been reborn. After the remaining men get captured by the clown, the wisest one refuses to escape and allegedly gets stabbed in the back. The most mature one dies after drinking poisoned coffee, which the story refers to as a love potion. The most wary one gets nailed to a tree in the middle of the night, even after taking many precautions because they suspected the other two. The earliest riser eats poisoned ham and eggs and dies while reminiscing of a shrine maiden they apparently saw at some point. The one who had been reborn is the last one left, and decides to hang themselves again, this time successfully. At the end of the story, we learn that a shrine maiden saw a beautiful blonde girl walking away from a neglected building in the forest, the same building where the honest men were staying. She also notes that she was the only woman of the 8 honest men. The girl stuck out her tongue and quickly bowed as she walked away and left this paradise, revealed to be Gensokyo. Alright, so where do we start here? Let's get this out of the way. The story itself is amazing. It gives you such a feeling of dread while reading it as you try to piece the events together, and it does a really good job at almost making you feel like you're there as one of the 8 honest men, with all the confusion and fear as your partners start going down one by one. And it does all of that in such a short amount of time. And he was reading for a music CD. Soon is very careful with the information he reveals and how he chooses to reveal it, in such a way that making sense of the events is not exactly a straightforward task. Of course, the big mystery is who is behind all these murders, and as you might expect, there's not really one answer to that question. It's been discussed time and time again, and over the years many theories have surfaced about the identity of the culprit. One thing that's consistent in pretty much all of them is that the only girl from the group is involved, as she's seen walking out of the mansion at the end of the story. My own conclusion when I first read through it was that the clown is some sort of yokai, and that they had a hand in some of the deaths for the sake of playing tricks on the minds of the honest men. Then, fueled by the paranoia of knowing that something's hunting them down, they start thinking that it's one of them and each makes plans to kill the others. The girl at the end would be the most beautiful one in this case, since she was simply taken away by the clown and not killed, which could also imply that there was a pact between the clown and her. Another thing that supports this is the fact that the Shrine Maiden also describes the girl leaving the mansion as beautiful at the end of the story. One of the most common readings from what I've seen also involves the most beautiful one, but this time directly as the killer herself. Again, the way her story is worded implies that she didn't die and was simply taken away. Or if we wanna go this route, it could also just be a lie. After that, there were 6 honest men left. Not because one of them died, but rather because one of them stopped being honest. It could also line up with the events from the most cowardly, who mentions losing their loved one. Okay, so in the version from the Touhou wiki, this line is translated as the people I cared about. But from the very little I know about Japanese, omoibito rather refers to a person you think about, a person you like. And in fact, the translation done by Kafka Fuda does in fact put it as such. In their thoughts, they also mention that the interlude could be written from the girl's perspective, probably talking down to the most cowardly one for attempting to run away. Another theory is that the most cowardly one is the killer, and that this story is talking about someone who's gradually turning into a yokai. We see this in the prologue with the line, "and right away I stopped being human," and later again after the most cowardly attempts suicide. So why don't I try pretending to be human just once more? Again, if we refer to the interlude, it could also be read as this person talking down to herself for being too cowardly. And the way it's worded also lines up with the next story told from this perspective. Upon finishing my job, I started preparing breakfast and waited for the dawn, that being the ham and eggs the earliest riser had in the morning. After that, I, who have been reborn, was assailed by intense drowsiness yesterday evening, which could be referring to after they prepared breakfast, something that had to be done in the evening since she's not the earliest riser. The next part is where it gets a bit fuzzy since she mentions hanging herself again, and going by the final line, the assumption is that this time she succeeded. Or maybe we could read it in a similar way as before with the most beautiful one, meaning that she's simply not part of that group anymore. This reading also lines up with some of the stories from the Comic at 63 version, particularly this one mentioning a girl that doesn't look human nor yokai. It is kinda interesting reading and trying to piece both versions together, but I still choose to believe that the latter version is just making small references to the original, since for a bunch of the stories it can be kind of a stretch and some just don't line up at all. Some people also tie this reading to Alice Margatroyd, which, fair enough, there's some reasoning for that, but I find it hard to pin this as any character we know of because of that one detail at the end that mentions that the girl does in fact leave Gensokyo after the events. This also applies to the reading that it was Flandre who killed all of them. That's a very easy conclusion to reach, seeing as this released so close to Embodiment of the Scarlet Devil, not to mention the references Flandre has to the original novel and then there were none. She would also explain the blonde Shrine Maiden one of the men saw, seeing as she also wears red and white. But aside from that, she doesn't really fit in within the rest of the story, unless we go with the assumption that the killer is completely unrelated to the 8 honest men, which I don't think is likely since the story heavily implies that it was one of them who planned everything. There's also the clown. In any of these theories, it could be a stand-in for the culprit, it could also again be an outside force like a yokai, either trying to assist the real culprit or just acting on their own. Actually, nowadays we do have a clown, right? In the form of a certain blonde fairy, but that's obviously completely unrelated. Or is it? Yeah, it is. Alright, that's it for the theories I know of and find more likely, so I think it's about time I mentioned the art for the album. Both versions feature the same cover, depicting this girl sitting down holding a cross. Most people assume she's the same girl from the story, and she's lovingly referred to as Jacket Girl, since, well, she's in the CD jacket. Curiously enough, there was another version of this art that Sun posted on his blog before the release of the album, which features a slightly clearer background where you can faintly see the shape of something or someone else behind the girl. The CD itself is also different depending on the version. The Comic at 63 one just has Jacket Girl again, meanwhile the Comic at 62 version has this other girl donning a Shrine Maiden-esque attire. The first assumption is that she's Reimu, but that doesn't really make sense. Dolls in Pseudo Paradise was probably finished before the OST, but regardless, going by the drawings Sun posted on his blog and, once again, Seiko Project, it seems he had already settled on a design for Reimu way before this album, and the girl in the CD looks nothing like it. Maybe it's the Shrine Maiden for the story? That would make sense, I guess. The most likely explanation is also the most boring one, and it's that Sun apparently just really likes Shrine Maidens. A bunch of his older drawings are just that after all, so we could assume that the girl in the CD is just another one of them. Speaking of that, again in this story, the earliest Riser wonders if the Shrine Maiden they saw was actually blonde, which most likely is referring to the culprit, but funnily enough, at some point Sun did in fact draw a blonde Shrine Maiden, commenting that it kinda looks like Marisa. I don't think it has anything to do with this, I just wanted to point it out. So that's about the art. But then who is the Shrine Maiden in the story? I honestly don't think it's Reimu. I think it could be either a previous Hakure Shrine Maiden or someone else entirely. Could be the girl from the CD, but again that's impossible to confirm. Dolls in Pseudo Paradise is not only a collection of great music tracks, but also just a genius piece of writing, definitely one of my favorite works that Sun has ever put out, which just makes me wonder why he never seems to recognize it. I mean, Sun talks are few and far between, and usually he doesn't mention his previous works unless asked about it, much less when it comes to his music. But the fact that he pretty much immediately replaced this album with a second version that completely does away with that great story, which I honestly think is the best thing he's ever written, just mystifies me. And it's a shame that he never really tried his hand at something like this again, probably because he decided to completely dedicate himself to Touhou Project, and a story like this wouldn't really fit with the direction the series was going. I mean, it eventually evolved into the Hifu series, sure, but that's a completely different beast. Which is also why part of me doesn't even consider this album to be Touhou, really. I mean, I mentioned the attempts at trying to tie in different characters, and also the fact that Gensokyo stated to be the setting, but really this just kinda works on its own, I think. But whether it is a really good Touhou horror story, or simply its own self-contained thing, that doesn't really change what it is at its core. A neatly woven mystery about the allure of paradise and the horrors that dwell in it. That's what Dolls in Pseudo Paradise is to me. Thank you all so much for watching as always. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel, maybe comment if you feel like it, and stop by my streams on Twitch if you have the time. With that, see you next dream.